Greetings, citizens of Nindie Nation, and welcome to all newcomers just stumbling upon this video looking for some spectacular indie games, or Nindies, to add to your Nintendo Switch library. As much as we love all Nindies here at Nindie Nation, today we're going to focus on titles that weren't just great the first time around, but those which have received significant updates above and beyond performance and bug fixes, making them not only better than they were at launch, but actually worth going back to even after you have completed them. And the best part? The added content we'll discuss today is all free from the developers. Some titles feature epilogues to the story's conclusion, others feature alternate paths, new characters to play as, or new modes that create entirely new ways to play the game. There are 7 titles made by independent developers who truly love the games they've created and want to make sure they leave gamers with the best product and strongest lasting impression possible. And we couldn't be more thrilled to share this list of the 7 Nindies that have aged like a fine wine. Please note that some games will have very light information about additional content. I am taking the assumption that you have not played any of these games, so as far as I am concerned, there will be no spoilers. However, please keep that in mind as you may see or hear something you consider a spoiler. To kick things off, the reason for this video getting a jump start in production was the release of Celeste's Chapter 9. Released in early 2018, Celeste is a passion project by Matt Makes Games, the team responsible for the widely praised Towerfall and Towerfall Ascension. The game was a critical hit upon release, receiving a whopping 92 on Metacritic, and still sits as one of the top 10 Switch games by review scores. For Nindie Nation, we think it's in the top 3 at least. Celeste is an engrossing story with seemingly simple gameplay that ramps in difficulty as the story ramps in emotion, enveloping the player in a symphony of gameplay, storytelling, and one of the best gaming soundtracks in recent years. And beyond the original story mode, Matt Makes Games added enough additional content to see the game twice over after the credits roll. However, those were more focused on challenges and could be quite punishing. In early September 2019, Matt Makes Games released what they call the conclusion to Celeste's story in an additional chapter that adds another 20 to 30% more content after the original game's conclusion. The content was added at no additional cost to the player, even though it includes entirely new story content, musical compositions by the returning Lena Raine, new environments to explore, and even new mechanics that can be retroactively used in the original game. This content, by all accounts, should cost at least an extra $5, and is just one more reason for every Switch owner to pick up a copy of Celeste if you haven't already. Dead Cells is a roguelike Metroidvania game released in the summer of 2018 for the Switch by indie developer Motion Twin. If roguelike Metroidvania sounds like a different language, it basically means that the game is meant for you to fail multiple times as you acquire new abilities, always getting stronger, faster, and smarter with every attempt to reach the final boss in a game that is procedurally generated, meaning elements from enemies, power-ups, and even the level layout is altered every time you start from the beginning. It is an intoxicating mix of elements that make this side-scrolling action game a tough, fair, and incredibly addictive game worth the price of admission for any Switch owner. For me personally, I had over 50 hours into my original 1.0 version of Dead Cells, but through player feedback and Motion Twin's ongoing dedication to make Dead Cells the best game it can be, they made a few significant updates which dramatically improved the game, adding a ton of new content, including more levels and bosses that extend far beyond the game's initial release. Of course, there are tons of quality of life updates. Text, graphics, UI, performance updates abound, but across the 5 updates, there were 2 significant packs that really added even more oomph to this already incredible game. In February 2019, the Pimp My Run update version 1.1 added challenge areas in between levels, allowing you to take a gamble on a tougher room for significant rewards, and an achievement system for those of you itching to measure your performance against other players. players. A custom game mode was also added that lets you select which items are available and what can be unlocked, basically allowing you to create the run you want based on a preferred playstyle. The entire early portion of the game was also reworked to make later game content of Dead Cells more accessible for newcomers. All of those additions, plus new weapons, traps, abilities, and a stable 60 frames per second, made this release something many developers might save for their Game of the Year release. But if that wasn't enough, just this month in September 2019, we saw the next significant update to Dead Cells for Switch, dubbed the Who's the Boss update. In this version 1.4, completely new weapons themed around the main bosses of the game were added and are now permanently unlockable after defeating the main villains, creating entirely new playstyles down to the core of the game itself, in addition to new abilities, traps, and mutations. Of course, across Dead Cells 14 updates, there have been over 100 balance tweaks, bug fixes, and performance improvements to keep this game fresh for longtime fans, all while creating the best experience possible for newcomers. There's no sign of Motion Twins slowing down anytime soon. Dead Cells is an awesome game at any price and just keeps getting better. Blaster Master Zero was a launch title for the Switch, releasing in March of 2017 by acclaimed retro developer Inti Creates, who is known for their work on titles like Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon, Mighty Gunvolt Burst, and Dragon Marked for Death, just to name a few. Blaster Master Zero is the revival of an old arcade and NES title where you explore alien worlds across multiple playstyles. In one, you are platforming in an ATV-like vehicle with powerful weapons and evolving maneuvers, and in another, your pilot leaves the vehicle and enters dungeon areas in a top-down perspective shooter that plays a little like a twin-stick shooter if it was built for a Zelda-style game. The revival adds a compelling story, leveling, and RPG systems, and a ton of varied environments worth exploring to find all of the upgrades to max out your gear. Since release, Blaster Master Zero has seen 5 significant updates, all for free, that add new fun characters such as Gunvolt and Ekiro from Inti Creates' other titles, and, as a little foreshadowing to other games on this list, they even added Nindie fan favorites Shantae and Shovel Knight into the mix. Also, a New Game Plus mode was added to help you clean up areas you missed with the aid of all of your upgrades from a previous campaign run. The Blaster Battle mode, which is a surprisingly deep and fun one-on-one battle mode between you and a CPU or another player, and co-op modes for the entire campaign. With the new modes, New Game Plus, and multiple new characters with unique abilities, I added 2 entire playthroughs to my time with this game and ended up spending over 20 hours in this world. And if you're still itching for more Blaster Master Zero, you can check out the sequel, which just released earlier this year. That game, Blaster Master Zero 2, is one we made a Let's Play Nindies video for, so go check that out. Enter the Gungeon, developed by Dodge Roll and published by Devolver Digital, is a top-down bullet hell twin-stick shooter that also employs the roguelike mechanics of fail a bunch but keep on getting a little stronger. You may also hear this sometimes referred to as a Souls-like, based on the Dark Souls series of games which share similar gameplay mechanics. Releasing in 2016 and getting a Switch port near the end of 2017, Enter the Gungeon is a widely and unanimously acclaimed title across its multiple releases over the last few years, currently sitting at an impressive and much-deserved 87 on Metacritic. The game, like many others on this list, has seen over a dozen updates to address performance, balancing, and bugs, while adding small abilities and weapons, but Enter the Gungeon saw 3 significant updates before its final Farewell to Arms update in May of 2019. The first major update, Supply Drop, was included alongside the original Switch release and added over 10 new weapons, 25 new items, and 15 new enemies, and 4 significant new bosses. The second update, and first to make it to the Switch post-launch, was the Advanced Gungeons and Dragons update in July of 2018. It added over 350 new unique weapon and ability combinations, a new secret level complete with a new boss, new characters and NPCs or non-playable characters, and over 30 new weapons and items. The Advanced Gungeons and Dragons update also added enhancements such as a turbo mode, allowing you to dramatically increase the speed of the game, and a new type of chest, the Synergy chest, which added new random elements to the game that could turn the tide of any run by modifying weapons with random chance. The final and bittersweet update, titled A Farewell to Arms, released in April 2019 and brought with it yet another new secret floor with a new boss, 22 new weapons bringing the final total to 243, 14 new items and pickups, 2 new playable characters, and the largest batch of performance and quality of life improvements yet seen in the game. This game went from huge to ridiculously massive and can easily provide over 100 hours of entertainment. If you like twin-stick shooters and are up for a challenge, this is a game not to miss on the Switch.
Shantae, half-genie hero.
By developer Way Forward, the Shantae series is a 2D platformer with open-world areas dating all the way back to the Game Boy Color. With Half-Genie Hero, the sequel in summer of 2017, players got their first chance to see the wisecracking genie in gorgeous hand-drawn art that makes the game look like a Saturday morning cartoon. Packing the largest adventure for Shantae yet, the title received multiple updates that added difficulty modes to make the game both harder and easier, as well as a new Game Plus mode, which caused me to put an entire second 8-hour run into the game. Over the past 2 years, Shantae has received a few updates with costumes and characters to allow fellow Nindie staples such as Shovel Knight and Blaster Master to appear in the game as well. In the summer of 2018, the game received the Shantae Jammy update, which not only lets you play the game as Shantae in her pajamas, but also adds fun new abilities that let you float around on a cloud and throw bouncing sheep as a projectile. It was a fun update that created many new ways to approach the open-ended levels. Nowadays, if you're going to pick up Shantae Half-Genie Hero, you can usually find the Ultimate Edition on sale, and while that technically includes paid DLC, I wanted to mention it because the 2 expansions are massive. The first, Pirate's Dream expansion, adds a brand new story mode where you play as the sometimes villain, sometimes friend Risky Boots, and lets you see what happens to Risky as her and Shantae part ways throughout the primary campaign. In the other expansion, Friends Till the End, you get to play as 3 completely different characters: best friend Bolo with his melee-style attacks, Sky with her bird who swoops down to attack enemies or take you to secret areas, and Roddy Tops, the spunky zombie who throws her limbs at enemies. It sounds weird, and it is, but it's hilarious. Whether you pick up the original version or the preferred Ultimate Edition, Shantae Half-Genie Hero is one of the most polished indie titles you can find on the Switch and will give you at least 20 hours of gameplay. In August 2018, Switch owners were the first to bear witness to a retro throwback that, for the first time since Shovel Knight, was able to perfectly recapture the magic of a game's inspiration while also adding and expanding on the original idea. The Messenger, developed by Sabotage Studio, is a 2D action game that borrows most of its mechanics from Ninja Gaiden, but throws in a time-traveling mechanic that has you traversing both 8 and 16-bit worlds with a story, soundtrack, and overall production that is absolutely stunning. Over time, the Messenger received minor updates to provide more options within gameplay, UI and quality of life improvements such as inventory and map management, and even a new Game Plus mode. It wasn't until July 2019 that we saw the game's massive expansion. Announced in December 2018 and released the following July, The Messenger: Picnic Panic takes place after the events at the end of the original, and by all accounts should be its own standalone sequel. The game takes place in all new locations featuring a vibrant 80s day at the beach color palette, entirely new soundtrack, which is incredible by the way, new bosses, and even new mechanics to help tell the story along the way. With the original game lasting around 10 hours on average, most gamers will find easily 5 hours worth of content within Picnic Panic, and every minute is worth the journey back in time or into the future with our sarcastic shinobi savior. I have no idea why Picnic Panic is free. Like a couple of other mentions on this list, it really shouldn't be, but it is, and it is all the more reason for Switch owners not to pass up this unique and tough-as-nails action platformer. To wrap things up, We're gonna need to take a step back into the year 2011, when a couple of designers working out of Way Forward came up with a joke video game about a shovel-wielding knight. Over the next couple years, that joke turned into a real game that saw the original developers quitting their day jobs, forming yacht club games, and beginning full-time work on Shovel Knight, leading up to one of the most successful Kickstarters of all time in 2013. The Kickstarter is important and relevant because the goals were blown away by so many leaps and bounds that the team at Yacht Club kept adding new features and milestones, ultimately having to release a standalone Shovel Knight title in June of 2014 and the following releases piecemeal over the last few years. What we ended up with is one standalone title in 2014 that became the poster boy for the indie game renaissance, followed by an ever-growing list of add-on expansions large enough to be their own games. The list is finally culminating in 2019's two final expansions. We don't have dates, but as of recording in September 2019, they were confirmed for release this year. That means players could come to Shovel Knight in a couple of ways. If you supported the original Kickstarter, you get all of the versions and releases for free, so that was technically the original way to buy the game. If you bought the game before 2017, you probably purchased the simply titled Shovel Knight. But around early 2017, we saw a shift in focus to what was called the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove across physical and digital releases. In most cases nowadays, if you buy Shovel Knight, you get the Treasure Trove version. And for anyone considering a purchase of Shovel Knight, I absolutely recommend that version. So going forward, we are going to assume that the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove variant is the default. So what is Shovel Knight? Well, it's an indie game with an insane scope to recapture the best elements of every great NES 8-bit game, with the games most frequently referenced by Yacht Club being Zelda 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, the Mega Man series, Castlevania 3, and DuckTales. What you get is a side-scrolling action platformer with an open-ended level design that creates multiple opportunities to find secrets, upgrade equipment, and expand your weaponry as you work toward the final areas of the campaign, defeating along your way members of the Order of No Quarter gang of villains, who all give Shovel Knight a new ability exactly like the Mega Man series once they're defeated. There are numerous characters to meet and mini-games to play along the way as well, and Shovel Knight is an extremely rare example where the ridiculous scope the developer saw never ended up hurting the game's design. Originally slated for release at the end of 2013, the only thing Yacht Club's scope creep hurt was the release schedule, which we should finally see to completion at the end of 2019, marking the end of over 8 years of Shovel Knight development. The core Shovel Knight experience, if you will, is now referred to as Shovel Knight, Shovel of Hope, and won a boatload of Game of the Year and 3DS Game of the Year awards in 2013 and early 2014, and created such an icon in the industry that Shovel Knight now appears across tons of indie titles, including Runbow, Runner 3, Blaster Master Zero, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, and even the AAA Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. In addition to Shovel of Hope, Shovel Knight saw 4 major updates, with 2 still unreleased but have been fully playable at trade shows, so you'll see footage of them in this video. There have also been nearly a dozen minor updates, adding playable characters, amiibo support, co-op gameplay, and a versus mode in addition to all of the regular bug and performance improvements. The first major update released a little over a year after the original Shovel Knight and launched in late 2015 with the title Plague of Shadows. This expansion sees the entire game from the perspective of one of the Order of No Quarter villains as an alternate timeline during the course of Shovel of Hope's campaign. Plague Knight, as he is known, decides to go rogue and seek out special ingredients, each guarded by a member of the Order, to concoct the most powerful potion in the world. Plague Knight plays differently than Shovel Knight, focusing on his double jump mechanics and customizable bomb attacks. You spend much more time strategizing how to approach a room or combat scenario than the brute force and precision timing needed to complete the game as Shovel Knight. Overall, the campaign is somewhat close to the campaign in Shovel of Hope, with minor story exceptions and battles against Shovel Knight, as he is, of course, your nemesis in this title. Plague of Shadows is the weakest part of Treasure Trove in my opinion, but it is an entire campaign to play through and worth the time for anyone who has already completed Shovel of Hope. Launching with a brief exclusivity window alongside the Nintendo Switch in March of 2017, the second and much better expansion, Spectre of Torment, brought such a significant amount of content to Shovel Knight, it was also released as a standalone title for $10 called Shovel Knight: Spectre of Torment, which would serve as the catalyst for the Treasure Trove release I mentioned earlier. In Spectre of Torment, you once again are placed in the shoes of a villain within the Quarter of No Order. This time it is Spectre Knight, an undead knight who is asked by the Enchantress to form the original Quarter of No Order, as this game takes place before the events in Shovel of Hope, serving as a prequel entirely. Focusing much more on acrobatics, as Spectre Knight can climb walls, dash through enemies, and is given a second jump of sorts as each time he slashes an enemy, projectile, or destructible object, he bounces off of it again. Those that are familiar with the jumping and attacking mechanics in the Messenger will see a lot of similarities here. As the game takes place in the past, the levels and path of the game are changed up quite a bit to accommodate Spectre Knight's abilities. I had played Shovel Knight early on in its life on the eShop, but it was actually Spectre of Torment that made me fall in love with the series and then go back to replay all other campaigns on my Switch after completing Spectre Knight's campaign. This is a wonderful addition to the Shovel Knight world, adding tons of lore and a surprisingly deep narrative that provides a lot of context to the world without ever getting in the way. Now, staying as spoiler-free as possible, in the credits scene, we get to see the Quarter of No Order building up their bases and starting to cause havoc leading up to the events of Shovel of Hope. And during that timeline, we are formally introduced to the primary subject of the upcoming Shovel Knight story expansion, King Knight. Set to release at the end of 2019, Shovel Knight: King of Cards is the final story expansion of Shovel Knight and focuses on King Knight, a false king obsessed with gold and treasure. We don't yet know all of the details about King of Cards, but we know a lot. As a character, King Knight focuses on dashing on the ground and mid-air with abilities tied to his royal decrees or minions who can do his bidding for him. He's always portrayed as a coward who relies on trickery, and it seems that will play a big role in his gameplay as well. The world will see an expansion nearly as large as all three previous campaigns combined, touting over 30 levels across 4 unique worlds, which is massive in scope in comparison to the other campaigns. King of Cards will also see a new final boss and an entirely new ending to the story of the Shovel Knight saga. As a bonus, and seemingly announced out of nowhere, this summer we learned that alongside this winter's release of King of Cards, we're also being treated to Shovel Knight Showdown, a Shovel Knight fighting game that admittedly I at first didn't really care about, but the more I've learned, the more I've realized this looks like a really fun way to keep the fun of Shovel Knight going well after the single-player credits roll. In Shovel Knight Showdown, we will see over 16 playable characters from the series duke it out in a 4-player battle, complete with a customized story mode for each character similar to Smash Bros., with most of these characters being playable for the very first time. You're seeing footage from IGN captured at PAX recently, and if you're like me, you're thinking this looks like an absolute blast. The game features numerous modes to obtain victory, such as defeating the other players, surviving the longest, or collecting items inside the level, and a handful of currencies that you can gain throughout for various upgrades in the story mode and unlockables like characters or stages throughout all modes. Shovel Knight Showdown isn't something we need, but it is shaping up to be a full-fledged multiplayer riot with a story mode that will take you a good while to complete. I'm really excited to see the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove culminate with such a cool bonus. And there you have it, friends. 7 Nindies on the Switch that have over time aged like a fine wine thanks to free additional content created by the developers. We don't deserve you, indie developers, but I think I speak for all of us that we sure appreciate the extra effort. Whether you're platforming your way through Celeste, blasting your way through Blaster Master, or battling your way to the tallest tower in Dead Cells, these games have a ton of content well worth your hard-earned eShop credit and have kept on giving over time. As a side note, all of these games, with the exception of Dead Cells and Shovel Knight, carry an MSRP of $20 or less, and all of them have seen sales of 50% off or more within just the last few months. So if you see any of the games on this list for sale and have digital dollars burning a hole in your proverbial pocket, do not hesitate to pick them up, as every game on this list also carries the Nindie Nation seal of approval. What did I miss? Do you have an 8th or 9th game that should be on this list? Are there enough of these titles to warrant a second video in the future? Let us know in the comments or on Twitter at Nindie Nation. And to be kept up to date on when any of these games go on sale, check out the Nindie Nation podcast right here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Nindie Nation is a weekly podcast focused on all things independently developed for the Nintendo Switch, with a brief overview of all new releases that week and a curation of the best sales to fill your SD card full of Nindie goodness. Nindie Nation also has a series of Let's Play videos called Let's Play Nindies, where you can see a couple games on this list, but we are primarily focused on hidden gems that don't get much attention otherwise. Nindie Nation is hosted by and a part of the Nintendo Village, a group of Nintendo-obsessed content creators delivering reviews, feature articles, and much more over at thenintendovillage.com, including their own weekly podcasts such as P-Myth Gaming and Nintendo Nostalgia. So go check out thenintendovillage.com or find them on Twitter at Village Nintendo to learn more. Thank you so much for checking out today's video. I'm Jeff, and this has been a list of 7 Nindies made better over time thanks to free added content. And I hope you found something useful that you'll check out on your own, because with this many great Nindies, until next time, friends, I know you'll have more than enough to keep your Joy-Cons synced.